Hi, welcome to the Oliver Fetter YouTube channel. Today is a very exciting day because later today at 1 o'clock, right now it's about 11, I will be dyno testing my Rabbit, which is exciting. I haven't dyno tested my Rabbit in several years now, and kind of my impetus for wanting to do so is that I will be putting in my new 1.9 liter ALH block to fill in the hole of this kind of weathered 1.6. And more than anything, I just want to kind of get a potato-tomato comparison between the two. And the best way to do that is go and dyno test what I have, and then go back to the exact same dyno and check it once I put everything back in afterwards. Today is kind of two things. One, it's a dyno prep session. There's a few things that of course cropped up literally the day before. Yesterday, me and Dave broke the Arduino control circuit while trying to make that rev limiter work. The rev limiter of course did work, and then as soon as I pulled out of his driveway it didn't work, which is not ideal. And then I also have a boost leak, which I found is the fact that my aluminum wind deflectors slice through my intercooler boot right here. So I need to replace this boot. And then the other thing on my mind before dyno testing it is that it has not had an oil change since probably last June or so. And you know, it's not that we're going to be dyno testing it for a terribly long time, but we are going to put it under significant duress. When you do dyno test something, you are putting basically a really heavy load on the engine, heavier than even the car itself, and we usually test it in 5th gear, so it means you're just basically running the car really hard for prolonged periods of time. And so to best prepare this motor to be doing that, I think it needs fresh oil and a fresh filter. And you know, whether it's good or not, the filter that's on there has been on there for like several years because this vehicle just doesn't get a lot of miles. You know, it might be driven maybe 1,000 miles a year if I'm lucky. So filter and oil, fix this boot, and then I already repaired the Arduino system, which was kind of what I needed to do first, because if it didn't work, I was just going to cancel dyno testing later today, because what is the point if the VNT system doesn't work? Before I jump into doing things, I also just want to give a primer on why I'm doing this and what to expect and kind of my guesstimates around it. Now, the last time we dyno tested this car, it was drastically different. I had my intercooler in the rain tray. We had a GT 2052 turbo. We had the 1.6 intake manifold. We had a 9mm fuel pump from Giles. Basically, everything about the setup was different. So since then, we've done an 11mm fuel pump. We've done a GT 2256 VK turbo. We've done a better intake manifold. Pretty much all the main players that make power have changed, and that's what I'm interested in. However, also since that dyno day, this engine has eaten a turbo impeller, as in the aluminum pieces of the compressor wheel went through the engine and I had to go pick them out. And afterwards we lost a decent amount of compression. So I would say the bottom end of this is at about 50% health. Which one could argue is it's kind of silly to dyno it at all when I know that it is lacking compression. But I'm just interested in getting a baseline and seeing what kind of numbers we get from it. Now, the way I want to dyno test it today is ideally to get a baseline. I want to set my VNT system to 0 basically. I want it to not make any boost on our first pass. And so we're just, and this is kind of skewed a bit because there's still a turbo on there. It probably still will make a PSI or two. What I'm interested in seeing is how much power the engine itself makes with the more performance fuel pump and plumbing, etc. But basically naturally aspirated to kind of get a baseline reading on like how much power does the engine make by itself. And then I want to jump right to 30 and then 35 PSI boost targets and see how much like maximum horsepower we're getting. And the interesting thing there is we'll actually hopefully see how much power that the turbo is adding, and my turbo system in general is adding to the engine overall, which will be a more interesting number than seeing how much power my clapped engine makes. As far as dyno numbers, just touching on that briefly, the last time we dynoed it, we made, I think, 80 horsepower and 112 foot-pounds, but that was on a Mustang dyno in New Hampshire at a diesel shop. They didn't really set it up very well. Whatever, and now we're in Denver. We're no longer at sea level. We are going to Dyno Pro, and they have a, what's it called? A Dyno Jet dynamometer. So we're using a different type of dynamometer. We're at a different elevation. And I just want to touch on the fact that pretty much these two tests, while we'll get horsepower numbers out of both, we have the previous numbers and we'll get numbers today, are completely impossible to compare, basically. We're talking different elevations, which already correlates to different power levels, and then we're also talking different ways of measuring, which basically throws out any comparison right away. So whatever we make today isn't necessarily comparable to what we'd made before. However, I do expect to make more horsepower this time. The car is significantly faster, it flows significantly more air, we're getting significantly more fuel to it. For all those reasons, it should be making more horsepower, excuse me. It's still kind of cold here. And as far as guess, because guessing is fun, I'm going to guess that with my clapped motor and all my sweet horsepower upgrades on it, that I think this time we'll crack 100 horsepower. I hope. That's like more of a hope than a reality. Honestly, the last time we dynoed the car, my hopes and dreams were crushed because I thought we were making 100 horsepower. But I think this time there's a very strong chance we're over 100, and kind of that's almost all I'll say to it, honestly. What's more interesting is how much power the turbo and everything is adding, and I would guess the turbo system is adding at least 50 to 60 horsepower easily. That's maybe the more interesting guess. At any rate, so that's kind of setting the stage for the dyno video to come out. I wanted to kind of preface what it means and how I'm using it, and kind of reflect on whether or not you can compare those numbers or not for people who watch this channel frequently, as a primer for when we post the dyno video. And that's just going to be about the actual process of dynoing it and the numbers we get, and kind of maybe briefly reflecting on that after the fact. So that's enough talking. I'm going to go ahead and repair my boot, which is priority number 1, because we can't make big power with a huge boost leak. And then priority number 2 is an oil change. And then if there's time, I'm going to wash and clean the car and whatnot. But here's the problem. That is my boost leak. Yeah, that's cut right through the boot. And okay, so there's the culprit. Big ass boost leak. Gonna replace that and probably trim that away some more so it won't do that again. Sorry, those last couple shots were blurry. I am all over the place today. Okay. New boot is on. Honestly, it's like still pretty tight on that outside. I might need to like trim this part of the boot down. But you know, for the sake of what I'm doing today and kind of just getting the shit show on the shit road here, we're going to use it. It's not going to reboost leak instantly, or at least it shouldn't. It should not. So, intercooler's back in, boot is on. I need to tighten the clamps. And then I'm gonna have to circle back to this. Today's just not the day to really get into fine-tuning this, but I'm gonna need to trim this boot about 1 clamp length and put it back on in order to make sure this clearance issue doesn't become. You go, so these host new couplers, and you can see that the inside of the tube is like right about here after it turns, so it's too far over this way. I did put this tape here as a slight ass saver. I should have probably just taken the time to cut this down. If you trim the end of this boot so it can slide on further, then it'll be just fine. But I'm feeling strapped for time today, so this is gonna have to do. But at least that won't be a boost leak like it was before. Okay, now that I've finished bumbling around with that, onto the oil change, and I think we'll have just enough time for me to eat lunch and everything, and still go to the dyno shop. The oil filter might be my single most least favorite thing on this car to service. Honestly, it's the one thing I hate about it. Because you take it off, oil goes everywhere. My filter also usually gets stuck on because it goes long intervals between. Wow, that was actually pretty good. All that griping about the fact that it goes everywhere. It didn't even go everywhere this time. But it often gets stuck because I don't change it very often, because I just don't put many miles on the car. And it's huge. It's in an awkward spot. And generally speaking, when you take it off, it drips oil all over the front of the block. And then, you know, it kind of catches it and then it drips down later. It's really annoying. New filter. Put it on gently this time. This was actually really chill. Aside from the fact that I tightened the filter accidentally first before loosening it. The last time I did the filter before this one, I had to pound a screwdriver through it to get it off. Okay. So this thing takes about 5 quarts. This is just 1540. I don't buy fancy oil for this engine anymore because it just leaks it out anyways, and I just made a mess. At any rate, this takes about 5 quarts. It would be a good idea to pre-fill the filter because the filters on these are actually huge, and you will incur engine wear from all the time it's dry while it's trying to fill your filter. It's no bueno. So I'd recommend you do that. I didn't do that, so I'm going to crank the engine over a bit without starting it, which means I'm just going to keep the fuel pump solenoid unplugged, and that will prime my oil pressure / fill my filter. because I skipped that step, but it's definitely better just to fill it. Okay, so now I'm priming the filter, which just means I'm going to crank without starting. And then, of course, start it, run it for a few seconds until there's oil pressure, and then check again. And let's see how we're looking. First off, I think that is just the oil I dumped over the backside of the motor, which I was stoked about. Yeah. Yeah, that was silly. I pretty much dumped freaking part of the oil just over the backside of the motor while sloppily filling it. Okay, and we're about halfway on the stick, which is perfect for me and my purposes. And we have oil pressure, so that will be just fine. That's a wrap. That was dyno prep session. Fixed a boost leak, changed the oil, fixed my Arduino, or at least explained what I fixed. Hopefully my shitbox holds itself together for like the 1 mile drive there. And I'll have a dyno results video for you very soon. Have a nice day out there.